everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're back with fantasy indie author Daze Evander. Hey, Daze, welcome back.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So glad to have you back. And today, I want to discuss writing tips with you. So, how do you approach world building in your series, especially when balancing it with character development and plot progression?
So, I mainly approach world building in my fantasy series by utilizing outlines as much as possible. So, for every book, it's accompanied by a main outline where I break down every chapter, who's talking in the chapter, how many words it's going to be, the name of the chapter, what time of day it is. And then I accompany that with bullet points of all the main events that are going to take place in that chapter. And then I color code some of those events. And so that I'm always ending up building on every book from before. They all piece together sort of like a Rubik's Cube, so to speak. So outlines to me, because world building, can be quite extensive and overwhelming. And I personally am a plotter. I find plotting very, very helpful. And so that's my biggest piece of advice is to use outlines as much as you can and just keep focusing on where are we going next and how do we get from point A to point B, and also to keep the audience engaged in that you want the audience to want to know what happens next. So keeping that in mind when you plan out your chapters and plan out your cliffhangers, how you're going to lead into a sequel, I would say the most important thing is to utilize an outline, because you can also make sure for guarding against plot holes, ensuring that there's consistency in the narrative. I found that those have been the most helpful for me so far.
Great. That's a great idea to just have a strong outline and then you can connect the dots from there. And I do know you love drafting dialogue. And what tips would you offer writers that are struggling with writing natural, engaging dialogue?
So I would personally recommend listening to a lot of conversations. Now that can be on TV shows, listening to also like how you yourself speak to others, take inspiration from your own conversations in real life. But I would also, in a fictional way, to focus on the personalities of the characters, and then also ask yourself narratively, in this scene, what are you trying to convey? And so there's, through the use of also mannerisms and their tone of voice, the facial expressions that accompany what they're saying, there's a lot of ways that you can break down and flesh out dialogue aside from just the words they're saying. But my big piece of advice also with that is to ensure what they're saying sounds like someone would truly say that in real life. You want that immersiveness of the audience. You don't want it to feel like they're reading from a script, so to speak. You want to feel like someone in, even if it's this high fantasy, you know, situation that maybe not be realistic, it can feel very realistic if the characters who inhabit it feel like real people. So I would say, they make sure that there's, they say things incorrectly sometimes. Sometimes we say something we don't really mean, or that's a subconscious, on a subconscious level. So my advice to other writers is, to also, after you've drafted your dialogue, to read it out loud as well, hear how it sounds, hear how it flows. And, but to keep in mind, one, what are you trying to convey through this dialogue? And then also keeping in mind who is speaking and how is that going to affect how they talk to other people. And then, making sure that stays consistent with your story as well.
On that topic of just meaningful elements in the story, how do you keep track of all the narrative puzzle elements and ensure the story's components connect meaningfully with each other across the entire series?
So I make sure that the narrative puzzle elements um, are continuous through the story, not just through an outline that goes with the manuscript, but also in the manuscript itself. Before the story is published and it's in that draft form I use Google Documents, and I will color code inside the document. I'll highlight certain things in a specific color that pertain to a certain character or a certain location. And so when I'm in the manuscript writing new scenes, because sometimes I write out of order, I make sure that there's still color codes inside, that certain things are bolded or italicized. And in having that inside the manuscript, it can help you stay on top of juggling so many narrative components, because you're constantly being reminded of them when you're in the script itself.
Interesting. And When you're planning, because I know that you are a planner and you do plan far ahead and you not don't necessarily have to work in order like you said, but when you're planning and deciding on themes, how do you kind of decide on which themes and which standout characters you need each year when you're expanding your series or even just throughout a novel?
Yeah, so choosing who becomes the next character standout, it does depend on the story itself because each character has naturally led into who gets to be sort of on the next front cover and that theme that surrounds them, the color scheme, their outfit, that's really determined by the character themselves. I really like the front covers to reflect their personalities. And I think like what would they choose for their own cover? And I like to stay very true to who they are. And but yes, I do plan ahead who becomes the next character standout. And but sometimes I don't know until I'm done with the book 100%. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I see. I've sort of been subconsciously preparing this next person to be the next lead. So it does come down to planning, but also sort of letting the characters tell the story and that their individuality gets to shine through. And I think that that's really exciting is letting them be themselves.
Right, exactly. And what would you say are some methods and rituals that you use to overcome writer's block, especially when you're working on an expansive multi-book series?
I definitely when I need to overcome writer's block while writing this series, I find that listening to music helps a lot. I like to take breaks to go daydream, and I like to listen to different songs that the artists either they've inspired some of my characters or their lyrics correspond with what they might be going through. Because also with writing first person perspectives, you as the author, you're jumping into their head, so to speak. You have to become them and write as them. So I find that listening to music that will mirror what they're going through or some of their personalities, it helps gets me in the right headspace to write as them. And so music definitely. Also, of course, other types of fiction, playing a video game, watching YouTube videos, watching videos on social media, because you can find inspiration for characters or what they go through in all different types of ways. And so I find that making sure I take regular breaks just to go be out in the world myself or observing what some other people are going through, hearing from other people's life experiences and perspectives helps me enrich the characters and write characters that are nothing like me, but I want them believable to the audience that that's a real person, you know, going through their own thing. And so I find that getting inspiration from other creatives and other things in this world and taking that break to recharge and then go back into it, that's sort of how I overcome writer's block is to go back into fiction, other types of fiction, and then I feel recharged and ready to tell my own story.
Well, Days, thank you so much for all your wonderful tips on writing.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's interview with fantasy indie author Daze Evander. Be sure to check out our website for more videos. Wishing you all a fulfilling and successful writing journey.